Good evening, everyone, and thank you to the organizers of the series for inviting me to speak here. Being the director of the Rubenshuis, the Museo del Prado is a very special place to me. The magnificent collections in general reflect the intimate historical ties between Spain and Flanders, but the museum's holdings are particularly rich in Rubens of the very highest standard. For every art historian seriously studying the artist, the Prado is and perhaps even the most important place of pilgrimage. It is in the knowledge that most of that collection was produced in the very Antwerp house and studio, which I am now managing through a program of extensions and renovations, that I can say that I somewhat feel at home here. As we are finishing up the evacuation of the collection in Antwerp, it is doubly rewarding for me to be here. Oddly, I was in the Prado rather unexpectedly last weekend on Saturday the 11th. Flying from San Juan in Puerto Rico to Brussels, my connecting flight was severely delayed, which gave me half a day in Madrid on Saturday rather than a short layover in Barajas. I called a friend, a lady in waiting at the Spanish court no less, and we spent 3 glorious hours studying Rubens and Jan Bruegel and exploring other treasures of the Prado. Thank you very, very much for the lack of punctuality, Iberia. Much appreciated. I must say that this far exceeded the in-flight entertainment options too. After a sleepless night on an Airbus, my impromptu visit was refreshing. I was perhaps less focused than I otherwise would have been, and my fuzzy jet-lagged status allowed me to see pictures in a different way, with less intent and more spontaneous perception, I guess. The tour inspired me to change the topic of my talk. I was initially going to speak about Rubens as a gentleman dealer, a caballero marchante, about the artist as a shrewd businessman who operated with a great sense for financial gain in the international art market. I was going to discuss the role of a recent museum acquisition in Rubens's continental wheelings and dealings in antiquities in great detail, and was also going to look into Rubens's other finances, real estate investments, financial products, and into the handling of the complex and huge estate after his death in 1640. But honestly, as a director, I have to think and talk about money so often, particularly with a big building project on my hands, that I was loath to discuss money again and be a caballero marchante myself. Today, I would much rather talk to you about the value of things than about their price. I understand that Natalia Munoz Rojas has spoken to you about Rubens's landscapes in November, but my approach will be different, in that I will relate some of the late landscapes to the actual landscape of Flanders, using newly discovered and unpublished sources. In the process, and again in gratitude to Iberia for my delayed flight, I hope to change your experience of flying into Brussels airport forever by pointing out that when you arrive, de hecho, estás aterrizando en un famoso cuadro de Rubens. Brussels airport is situated somewhere beneath the rainbow here, a fact that had been lost on scholars who had interpreted this landscape as imaginary, as an abstract ode to the Brabant landscape. In fact, it is a topographically correct rendition of Rubens's country estate, Het Steen, which we will explore together in the coming hour. As the Rubenshuis in Antwerp is currently closed, it is only fitting for us to escape to his country house. It is from this location, too, that Rubens conceived later massive commissions from Philip IV, such as that for the Torre de la Parada. So I do hope you will forgive me for disrupting the program. Fasten seatbelts, let's taxi a brief bit through the Prado galleries, and then we are ready for takeoff to Flanders and a bird's eye view of Rubens's late landscapes. Thank you for flying Iberia. During my dreamy visit of the Prado between the burning sun of San Juan and the grey skies of Brussels, one of the pictures that caught my attention is this, Rubens's circa 1638 Judgment of Paris. Unfocused, my eye wandered on the middle goddess, Venus, and in particular on the bracelet clasping her upper right arm, containing blue and red stones, surely a signature of the artist, Pietro meaning stone and Rubens meaning red. She is the one to be chosen by Paris, over Minerva and Juno. On February 27, 1639, the Cardinal Infant Ferdinand writes to his brother, King Philip IV from Brussels, telling him that a cargo of Rubens paintings is on its way to Spain, among which the current picture. I will attempt a short passage in Spanish. Please don't be insulted. También está acabada la del juicio de París, que se olvidó en la memoria pasada. No la llevo el correo porque es muy grande, pero el ordinario haremos que se encargue de ella. Sin duda, ninguna, por dicho de todos los pintores, es la mejor que ha hecho Rubens. Solo tiene una falta que no ha sido posible que la quiera enmendar, y es estar demasiado desnudas las tres diosas. Pero dice que es menester para que se vea la valencia de la pintura. La Venus que está de en medio es retrato muy parecido de su misma mujer, que sin duda es lo mejor de lo que ahora hay aquí. The Cardinal Infant was keen to point out the likeness of the goddess to Rubens' young wife, Helena Vermeer, to bring an aspect of the painter's personal biography into this mythological scene. The slightly risque anecdote clearly increases the value of the picture to a connoisseur. Perhaps I was guided by a slight sense of homesickness, perhaps my own inclinations, different from those of the Cardinal Infant, got the upper hand, but I was particularly struck by the landscape background. I am sure I was the only person in the gallery that Saturday afternoon that was looking at the background. This landscape vignette, I will argue, forms an element of Rubens' biography as, and perhaps equally important to him, as the reference to his young wife. I know it's hard, but please try to concentrate on the background here. Facing the picture in this wonderful gallery here in the Prado is another landscape by Rubens from the same period, and it's the hunt for the Caledonian boar, not a similar royal commission, and it gives a better sense of the importance of landscape in Rubens' art at this point of his career. It is really an amazing painting, painted on canvas, which is very rare for his landscapes, and it gives it a very direct painterly quality. The sort of overarching feeling is almost that of Flemish tapestry of the 16th century. The figures are much smaller, and nature is almost overwhelming. The way the light falls in the forest, the reddish colors of the leaves, it really speaks of a deep involvement with the landscape he inhabited at that moment. So I was really taken back by this picture to the area of Rubens' country estate. And there are further pictures in the Prado collection which really testify to Rubens' habitat at this moment. He lived at Het Steen during the summer months, and if we look at this sketch from the same period for Vertumnus and Pomona, we can see that he was thinking about gardening, about building this estate, about really living in the countryside. So again, a vignette of what was occupying the artist in this late phase of his life. Here again, in this beautiful sketch in the Prado galleries of Hercules fighting the dragon in the garden of the Hesperides. And you can see in the background again this avenue of trees. We will return to that a little later on, the parterres and the hedged garden. This is what Rubens was doing in his private life at the moment. So from this, we will look at the actual landscape in which pictures like these were conceived. So we're in our Iberia flight now, high above Flanders, and I'm going to situate a bit this country estate Rubens owned. So the red mark indicates where Rubens' castle and country estate is situated. And this is, to use a beautiful American word, they do have a few beautiful words, this is really the heartland of Belgium, the heart of the land. This is the center of our country. To the south, you can see the military airbase of Melsbroek, but also the 3 runways of Brussels airport. To the north is the city of Mechelen, Malinas, with a huge marshalling yard for railway freight, very important for the Belgian economy. To the right here, this straight line is a canal between Leuven, Louvain, and Mechelen. To the left is the Brussels navigation, the Canal of Willebroek, which is the sort of central axis to the industrial development of Belgium. The yellow road running past the Rubens Kasteel in a small arc is the European way number 19 in Belgium. This is called the A1. It's our most important highway. It connects Brussels to Antwerp, and hundreds of thousands of vehicles pass there every day. To the left of that, or even in the middle reservation of that highway, are 2 railway tracks. So all the airport traffic going from Brussels north has to pass through, and also all the international trains running from Paris to Amsterdam go past Rubens's estate. To the left is another railway track with 4 tracks. We'll jump on the train on that track a little later on. If you were to bombard this area smartly, you had 6 bombs, and you would think about it a little bit, you could stop Belgium from running in a moment. So this is really the place where all our critical infrastructure comes together in a radius from some 6 kilometers around Rubens's country estate. The valley is shaped by the Seine River, which is a small river, 103 kilometers, so a small tributary in this large North Sea delta, but again, very important to the Belgian economy because it connects Brussels to Mechelen, to the Deile River, which then via the Ruppel ends up in the Scheldt River. This sounds very detailed, but it is hugely important because for centuries it was the only traffic connection between the capital, Brussels, and the mercantile center of Antwerp. So a hugely important transit zone. The River Seine is not the type of river that has sort of inspired national pride or poets or anything of the kind. It's a sort of very practical waterway. Nobody really loves it. In fact, in the early 90s, when a passenger flicked a cigarette butt out of a train near Brussels, the river actually set on fire over hundreds of meters. So it's a very unloved river. Until 2007, when a water treatment plant was installed, and finally all the water flowing out of the capital was being cleaned when it went back into the river. In the same year, the first fish was spotted in the river since human memory, so quite a long period. I'm not telling you all this obviously to depress you, because it sounds quite depressing, but I'm telling you this as a sort of antidote to the romantic lyricism of Rubens's landscapes, which have us believe that he lived in a rural Arcadia with few connections to industry or a trade. In fact, this area had been deeply enmeshed in trade for centuries. And it's important to know that, because Rubens can easily fool us. The very first train to ride on the European continent drove past Rubens's country estate at 1.5 kilometers somewhat in 1835, in May 1835, exactly 2 centuries after Rubens bought the country estate. And again, this is no coincidence. It just indicates that the estate was located in an important zone of transit. The illustration is from 50 years later. I imagine the event in 1835 was a lot less agreeable, with black smoke and dirt and less comfortable circumstances for the passengers. We will hop on this train in a minute. And we do so with one of my favorite Rubens scholars, Max Roses, a 19th century foundational Rubens scholar who used this train to travel to the estate of his hero, Rubens. And I have to warn you, this train really changed the way people experienced the landscape in the 19th century. The first train rode in 1835, and Victor Hugo, the famous French writer, took this train 2 years later in 1837, traveling from Brussels to Mechelen, and he notes in his diary that the little dots of the flowers in the field, red and blue dots, on the train changed in red and blue stripes. And this is exactly the sort of observation that was impossible before the advent of the train. So we'll return to that. Technology changes the way we can perceive and see the landscape, and Rubens will be part of that too. But back to Max Roses, who was, thanks to the train, trying to find the country estate of his hero Rubens. And it was not that easy in the 19th century. The castle had always remained in private hands. It was very little known. And Max Roses got lost on the way to the castle. And he writes in his diary, it's quite amusing, he always wears a long black cloak and a big black hat, and he writes that he sets off on a long walk, he ends up in the wrong village, it's very hot, the sun is shining too much, he has to make a detour. An hour later, he finally arrives at the little castle and he is completely overwhelmed and he assumes that it has been unchanged since the days Rubens lived in it. So this is what Max Rosus saw when he arrived in 1875. Shortly thereafter, a very good Belgian architect, Eugène Carpentier, would really drastically change the castle. Take a note of the lack of wings. It's just one central wing in 1875. When he's there, Max Rosus also makes sketches of the castle. He is really intrigued to be at the place where Rubens once lived. He makes a drawing of the castle. He makes all these notes. It's a very special day for him. And he will return to the castle after all the extension work has been done in 1998, we don't know if he took the train or how he got there. Did he get lost? Was it hot? We don't know. But from the diary, we can make out that he was, again, very, very excited to be there, because he notes about his guide, it's top right of the page, a certain Mevrouw Wouters, and the comment reminded me a little of what the Cardinal Infant said about the Venus. Max Rosus writes, oh, Miss Wouters, my guide, she looks a lot like Helena Vermont, actually. She is very blonde, but less fleshy. Enough of an introduction. Now we're going to approach the Het Steen and the area and this landscape through 16th and 17th century archival and cartographic documents to try and get a grasp of the actual landscape. And this is a very interesting map by Mathieu Bolin, who was the court engineer of the course of the river Seine. So the whole river is drawn out. And the goal of the map was basically to find ways to prevent inundations, which were very frequent and often lethal. Sometimes whole villages would have tens of people drown during the winter months. So the central government was trying to control the river and the landscape. And I was very happy to find this map because Het Steen, or the area around it, is on it. Frustratingly, for a map that is supposed to prevent inundations, it has a lot of water damage, especially in the area that is of interest to us. I can also tell you that the archivist in charge of this map was not too pleased with me wanting to see the document because, as you can read, it is 8 meters long. And this is the area that is of interest to us. You can see the holes, frustrating, a lot of water damage, and then even more frustrating, archival research is a very frustrating business. Het Steen is actually under the description number 3, so under the letterings, a drawing of the castle of Rubens would be very, very annoying. But we are getting much closer. And interestingly, on the map, just a kilometer away from Rubens' estate, is a sluice tower over the river Seine. It's named there, La Retenue, and it also has a mill next to it. The tower is quite ancient, late 13th century, early 14th century, and it was built to control the traffic over the river. So the city of Mechelen could levy a toll over every ship that came from Brussels to Antwerp. A very lucrative, interesting business to hold. Because the tower had sluice doors, it would hold the water of the river Seine back. And this created a reservoir of water. In the 14th, 15th century, a reservoir of water on a river meant nothing else than a sort of power base. And this created the perfect opportunity for mills to be installed next to the sluice tower. So when Rubens lived there, just off the map over here, there were 2 mill mechanisms. One was a wheat mill to make flour. The other was a fulling mill for textiles. So this economic unit was very close to Rubens' estate. He never painted it. Maybe because it was so closely related to industry and trade and did not have a sort of rural character. Looking at this map can give us really important insights about the landscape. This is what remains of the sluice tower today. It was bombed by the Germans in 1914, and the upper story has gone and the roof has gone too. Only part of it is still standing. But looking at this map, you realize that this tower in the 16th, 17th century, it didn't just hold water back from the river to create power. It's a specific type of sluice tower. It's also a spui. It also stopped incoming water from the river. So this is quite incredible to us today, but Rubens' estate is almost 100 kilometers inland from Antwerp, but the tides of the North Sea would manifest this deep inland. So every time there was a tide, it would go up and down in the landscape Rubens inhabited. So a very dynamic environment. And this sort of insight in the historical landscape really resonates with the things we're facing today with climate change, obviously. Today, the Flemish government is trying to restore this function of tidal landscape by building a new sluice system, high-tech, very expensive, to make sure that Belgium is ready for climate change. So the things that were happening in Rubens' age are happening today. So it's interesting to look at paintings from the 17th century and realize that they talk to our problems today. It's also quite interesting to have this knowledge about this being a tidal landscape, to look at Rubens' landscapes. This is a spectacular small landscape which is now in the Courtauld Gallery in London, a moonlit landscape with a waterway and a grazing horse. Elegiac quality, just stunning landscape painting. But with this new knowledge of the sluice tower and the landscape, we realize that the moon is not just a sort of photogenic source of illumination in the nocturnal landscape. It is an actual force of nature that was breathing water into and out of the landscape that Rubens was inhabiting. It had an actual effect on his surroundings. We'll return to that a little later. What I find really quite interesting, that in this environment, at the same time, different people are looking at the same elements of the landscape from a different discipline. This is the first map ever made of the moon, where there are named features on the moon. And it's made by Michiel Langrenus, a court cosmographer, an engineer and a cartographer at the court in Brussels, and someone Rubens knows quite well. So a very different way of looking at the same phenomenon, the scientific look of Langrenus versus the poetic, almost emotional way of looking Rubens had. Because, for example, the constellations in this landscape are imaginary. This is not a sort of scientific way of looking at the night sky, and this very much is. And the confrontation of these two ways of looking is very interesting to me, and it manifests itself in a lot of 17th century cartography of the region, where you have a sort of combination of a scientific way, of a mathematical, cartographic way of looking at the landscape, and a picturesque, more painterly way of looking at the landscape. Here, for example, you can see the normal aspects of cartography, with cities and villages indicated with little dots or with small indications of churches. But you can also see that there's a cart drawn by horses up there, and there's foliage from a tree, and there are two cows. Rubens' estate would have been at the tip of the tail of the upmost cow in this image. But don't be deceived by the cows and think that this is some sort of rural peasant landscape, because it was not. It was really engineered on a massive scale. We tend to think of the past as being quite simple and natural, but this is a big mistake to make. This is the ceremonial spade, which was used in 1550 to turn the first sod on the so-called Brussels navigation. And this is one of the major engineering projects Europe saw in the early modern period. It's a canal 30 kilometers long, 30 meters wide, and 2 meters deep, with a succession of 5 really high-tech lock systems to allow shipping over the canal. It's a massive, massive undertaking, and it really still defines the industrial landscape of Belgium today, and it still defines the map of Belgium today. So really almost incredible that people in the middle of the 16th century were able to achieve such things. Actually, it had been on the drawing boards much longer. Even from Burgundian times, there were ambitions to connect Brussels to Antwerp through a canal. But the city of Mechelen, which levied toll on the River Seine, always opposed the project and made sure it didn't happen. But the Habsburg rulers of the southern Netherlands were a lot more centralist in their opinions than the Burgundian dukes, and they succeeded in achieving this massive project. It was very important to them to sort of connect the court city of Brussels with the mercantile city of Antwerp, which opened to the world. So the canal was really a sort of core mission in the Habsburg politics of the 16th century. To give you an idea of what the effect of this canal was, it is almost inconceivable today. Like, it took normally 3 to 8 days to ship goods from Brussels to Antwerp. So if the river was working with you, 3 days. If the weather was bad, the flow of the river was bad, 8 days. If the canal was installed, it opened in 1561, the government capped the maximum travel time for the whole canal to 5 hours. So this is a sort of complete change of looking at the landscape, of living the landscape, of seeing the landscape. Cities became much closer to each other. People understood their national identity a lot better. It had a massive impact on the inhabitants of the southern Netherlands and Flanders. All these villages that used to live off levying toll over the River Seine suddenly lost all their income, except when the canal was closed for dredging. Rubens' estate was between Elewijt and Epicurean, so X marks the spot. This is where his country estate was. Rubens was a shrewd businessman. He owned a stake in the Brussels navigation, which he sold right before he bought the castle in Elewijt. It changed the whole economy of the place, so it was very interesting to buy an estate there. Now that the canal was there, you could export perishable goods over a much longer distance. So dairy products, milk, butter could be brought to the big city. So the value of this land increased a lot because of the canal, and Rubens benefited from that. Because of this success, a lot of other engineers came up with plans to build more canals. This is one example from an engineer from Mechelen who planned to build a whole network of canals, and these would have changed the whole landscape of Flanders. In the detail here, you could see one canal was going to run right past Rubens' estate, Het Steen, and another would separate it from the village of Elewijt. The green is all area that is prone to inundation, so the canals were also there to sort of diminish the risk of inundations. Michiel Langrenus, the court engineer we discussed a little bit earlier, he came up with a much more ambitious program to make a connection to the city of Mechelen. And if I say ambitious, I mean really ambitious. His idea was to make a bridge so the River Seine could be transported over a canal that was to be dug under the river. So really massive engineering projects. Obviously, because of exorbitant costs for the construction and considerable disruption to existing infrastructure, most of these projects never really happened. But it's important to know them because you have to realize that this rural area where Rubens lived was very closely enmeshed in metropolitan policies of economy, of ecology, of landscape management, and not a Virgilian Arcadia somewhere in a corner of the map. So that's Het Steen. And so often these canals were built to stop inundations in the north of the capital. Brussels was very prone to inundations, so there's a sort of connection between the rural area and centralist Habsburg policies to improve the conditions in the capital. This is the situation today. The pink is an area that is at risk of inundation, and Rubens' estate has the small moat in the middle. It's the one place there that is not prone to inundation. So he really knew how to pick his land. And you can see that Belgium with climate change is facing the same issues as people were in the 16th and 17th century. This is a continuation of the Bolin map of the course of the river Seine. It is also important to realize that these engineering projects on a macro scale were copied everywhere in the landscape on a micro scale. If a sedimented meander of the River Seine didn't allow for ship traffic to pass through, people would cut a small canal and make sure that the flow of the river would keep going. So all the landowners in the valley were doing similar things. And Rubens was no different. He built small dams and canals on his own estate. He created sluices, small sluices called arken with tubing under the ground, and in this manner he could irrigate or drain pastures, he could fertilize pastures, and he could really sort of play with the water on the estate. Neighbors and local authorities would be very interested if someone was building sluices like this, because it could affect the water table of estates up or downstream. So we have a lot of documents on what Rubens did on his estate. And this is really quite important to realize that Rubens didn't just paint the landscape, he also really shaped the landscape where he lived. He was very much involved in managing it. And this was important because it had a knock-on effect on what you might call the food chain in the 17th century. If the water was not managed well, the water table would rise. This would diminish the amount of grazing land available for cattle or horses. This in turn would make the price of hay go up very high. So this was expensive winter feed, and this would make that milk, butter, meat would all become a lot more expensive. So it was crucial for the central authorities and for landowners to make sure that they could control the water table on their estate. A good sort of pater familias of a country estate like Rubens needed to take this in hands. Let's leave the water and now approach Het Steen over land, as Rubens did, on horse or by coach from Antwerp to the city of Mechelen, Malinas, and then down to the small town of Appegem. The first part of this road map from circa 1600 shows that the road was actually paved. It was quite comfortable. You could sit in a coach and travel to your destination. But further on, past the town of Zemst, the road would become much worse. It's stated there quite literally there, no more paving here, the road would get quite bad, and in winter people would drown on this road every year, especially close to Brussels. So it was best to travel over this road in summer. Rubens would go to the church of Appegem, the town nearest to his country estate. And after this, no documents were known about Rubens's possessions there. So this was sort of the end of our road, and after that it was terra incognita. I discovered in the state archives in Brussels this map of a lawsuit between the town of Appegem and the Council of Brabant, which is the first time we can actually see the land near Het Steen in a cartographic source. At the bottom there is the church of Appegem, which we saw on the road map, and top left is Rubens's country estate, Het Steen. Let's zoom in a little bit. It's quite traditional in its layout. It has what we call a double motte structure, and a motte structure is a sort of moated defensive island. So people would dig a deep moat, they would throw all the earth on a central island and then build a defensive tower on the middle of that as a sort of primeval domestic structure. The tower was built at the end of the 13th century, and when Rubens bought the estate, it must have been the appeal of the building, really, because it has a long heritage connecting to the Middle Ages. There's a sort of romanticism and genealogy to it, which must have spoken to the artist. There is a second motte above that, quite larger, which has the 16th, 17th century house. And you can see here that there is an additional wing. So Rubens actually added to the castle in the 17th century. He died in 1640. This map is from 1647, but his massive estate wasn't settled until late in 1645, so this must have been built by Rubens. We know from documents that he had a contractor work at Het Steen, and during his life he promised this contractor to give him 2 paintings and some money for his work on the castle. But then he died, and the builder only received 2 copies, sadly. Here we see the same building on Rubens's famous painting with Het Steen, now in the National Gallery in London. You can see some of the similarities, this idea of almost like Flemish tapestry to the landscape painting that is in the Prado here with the hunt of the Caledonian boar, the similar tones and coloring and structure and sort of vivacity that is unique to Rubens. We see the building here from a different angle. We see the front facade without the wing, and we also see the tower just behind it. And the tower rose a bit above the house, but not very much. It was built in a very practical manner, early 14th century, late 13th century, to be just above the tree line. So you could look over the landscape, control it. It didn't need to be any higher than that. But it's a stunning sort of panoramic landscape of Rubens's estate. We'll return to this in a bit. The breakthrough in my research came actually because of COVID, because of the pandemic. Everything was closed, you couldn't do anything, but we were allowed to walk, and I did a lot of walks around Rubens's country estate to see what are the other buildings here. Are there more castles? Who lived here? What were the official bodies? Did they create archives? Where did those archives go? And this is one of Rubens's neighbors, Frederik de Marcelaar, here in a portrait by Anthony van Dyck from 1627. And he is a sort of swashbuckling cavalier, really sort of the cliché of the entrepreneurial 17th century man. He married with a very wealthy aristocratic woman in the Baronage family, and so he became the proprietor of the castle of Perk, neighboring Rubens's estate. And Rubens designed a frontispiece for a book his neighbor actually published. The man, he's a curious figure, really. He was the main political figure in the second quarter of the 17th century in Brussels, almost consecutively being the mayor of the city of Brussels. And he wrote this book on diplomacy, despite never actually having been a diplomat. But in Belgium, we know that if you are in Brussels politics for 25 years, you are in some way a diplomat. Rubens finished this in 1638. And de Marcelaar wrote a letter saying, finally, he made this frontispiece for my book. After 3 years, he's finally done. So we can deduce from this that the commission to make the frontispiece came when Rubens became his neighbor in 1635 on buying Het Steen. Interestingly, this man and his family have a private family archive which contains really important unpublished documents on Het Steen, among which these two surveyors' maps from 1686 and 1687. Rubens died in 1640, Helena Vermont died in 1673, but at this point, Rubens' estate is in the hands of Hyacinthe de Brugoven de Bergijk, who is the second son of her second marriage. It's still intact. The estate is exactly the same as in Rubens' day. The maps are incredibly detailed. Every plot is numbered, and this corresponds to an entry in a ledger which lists the nature of the land, its size, if it's moist, if it's arable land, if it's pasture land, if it's woodland. You can see the green edges are pasture, red edges are arable land, little trees are woodland. So because of this, we can perfectly reconstruct Rubens' ownings in the valley to the plot level. I have to warn you that this is only a segment of his owning, obviously, because he owned land, dispersed over the whole valley. And the totality of Rubens' ownings are about 130 hectares, if you put it all together, and I've looked it up. I think the Parco del Retiro is 113 hectares, so Rubens owned more land than the Parco del Retiro, really a substantial country estate. And these maps hold important keys for the landscapes too. Here you can see them on a meeting table for 12, so they're quite big, and the owner of the castle would hang them in a muniment room to make an impression on people who came paying a debt to him. It is really surprising how accurate these maps are. So this is a map from the early 19th century when Belgium became independent, 1830, and it is completely the same as the maps by surveyor Petrebus from the late 17th century. So incredible craftsmanship, really. And Eloate is easily recognizable. because the map resembles the head of a dog. And we are particularly interested in the point of the snout of the dog, which again has an image of Rubens's country estate. You recognize the double motte structure again, 2 islands with water around them, one has a tower, and then another has the domestic quarters. A 3rd wing has been added to it. Here we're coming to the sort of U-shaped architecture. But this gives us a grasp of where Rubens lived, what he saw, and also of what he painted. The surveyor of these maps, he was really quite precise. This is a rare case where we have someone else, Jacobus Harrewijn, making an engraving of the same building shown on the map, but from a different angle. But you can clearly make out this is the same building. The structure is exactly the same. Our surveyor is quite trustworthy. The engraving is from Praetoria Nobilia Brabantium. It's a sort of really lavish publication on the aristocratic houses of the Flemish nobility. But oddly, Het Steen, Rubens's estate, never made it into one of these publications, perhaps because it was not the sort of long-standing aristocratic seat of a family, maybe because it was too small, maybe because it was no longer architecturally fashionable at the end of the 17th century. But so this gives us a clue that we can really trust the draftsman, however naive, of our map. It's also quite interesting that the small section of landscape, some 5 by 10 kilometers, contains 5 major estates. 2 of these, top left, the castle of Perk, and the one central top, the castle of Scheplaken, have family archives that contain important information on the history of Het Steen, bottom right. So by walking around and looking at the archives, I could find a lot of new material on Rubens's estate. The building bottom left, by the way, is David Tenier's country estate, Drei Torens, 3 towers, not far away from Rubens's country estate. I mean, it's important to know that these families were not major aristocratic families. Only top left was an aristocratic seat. Most of these were manorial estates, seigneurial estates. So the titles were linked to the property of the land. They were not hereditary. Some of the families would be admitted to the hereditary nobility in the course of the 17th century. But when Rubens lived there, all these were manorial estate. The title was linked to the land, not to the man. This has often been interpreted wrongly in the past. Most of these families also had no mercantile ties. They did government jobs in the army, financial things for the church, and the position between Brussels and Mechelen offered really a lot of job opportunities for legal and financial profiles. So these people had nothing to do with business at all. Rubens was incredibly proud of the fact that he owned this country estate. On his tombstone in St. James's Church in Antwerp, the first mention is for his father. He says, I am the son of Jan Rubens, who was a senator of the city of Antwerp. And then the second mention is that he is Steini Toparcha. He is the Lord of Steen. So it was very important to Rubens' identity to own this place and to have this connection to the land. But as I learned from all these family archives, we should not believe in Rubens's paintings of this beautiful, idyllic countryside where the peasants are dancing arm in arm in peace and everybody is, drinking and having fun. In reality, this was a very cutthroat financial environment. Good fences made good neighbor, and like maintaining fences, clearing ditches and making sure you were protecting the boundaries of your property was very important. Even grazing your horses on your neighbor's land would lead to litigation. Damage to a single tree by a plow would lead to litigation. So people were really quite hard for each other. And this also explains the way Rubens came into the possession of the country estate. His predecessor, Jan Koolf, had heavily indebted the estate, and he could not afford to stay there without trying to find new money. And what happens then mostly is that your neighbors are your main creditors, so they would become your most important enemies. They would start grazing their cattle on your land, they would sequester your hay, they would have a bailiff come over to steal the fruits from your land, and so slowly your estate would decrease in size and productivity. And so this young Coles, predecessor of Rubens, he had to give up eventually, and Rubens was very smart. He had a middleman buy the estate from a bankruptcy, quite subtly. It's very expensive, 93,000 guilders, but he did it in a smart way. His name was not known. It was someone stepping in for him, really smartly done. And what I thought was quite interesting is that the moment Rubens buys this, I found the deed of sale, all the fruit on the land does not belong to him, but to the creditors of Cole. So Rubens owns the land, but nothing on it until the debt is settled. So don't think of the countryside as like a pleasant, easy environment as the landscapes might have you believe. I think the hunt for the Caledonian boar is much closer to it. Because of these maps, we can now really start looking at the known landscapes, the known late landscapes by Rubens again. And this is one example, landscape with an avenue of trees, painted in oil on paper, important, and then mounted on panel. It's now in Boston, in the Museum of Fine Arts. I recently discovered that it's not even in a gallery in the museum, it's in a seminar room, which is quite a luxury to have a Rubens landscape in a seminar room. But using the maps by Petrebus, we can now start to look at this landscape and devise what it is. And actually, it's a view from the tower, which was clearly the main attraction for Rubens for buying this estate, diagonally over this avenue of trees, looking back to the village of Elewaet. Even the small building in the background can be identified as Steenwinkel, another small country estate. So suddenly, these landscapes are no longer sort of abstract. We can pinpoint them on the map. The same goes for this landscape from the Barber Institute of Fine Arts in Birmingham, quite small landscape. It has very few topographical elements to it, but it does have the spire of a church in the background. And because of the hydrography, the way the water runs, and the distribution of arable land and forest, we can again really place this quite precisely in the landscape, very near to Rubens's house, near the Barebeek. And this is actually a small brook which Rubens diverted. You can see the diversion to feed the moat of the castle and to keep the water around his castle fresh. So again, these maps allow us to get much closer. Another example is a painting from a late landscape from the Louvre, really beautiful landscape painting with a windmill and a bird trap. And if we connect it with the maps, we can see there's a mill at some 15 minutes walk from Rubens's country estate. And then there's the church of the village of Perk. So if Rubens would walk from his estate towards Perk, this is exactly what he would have seen. He has sort of improved the landscape a bit with trees and water to make it more dramatic and attractive, but the topographical core of it is quite precise. And now a detail, just because I can, and just to show you how incredibly gifted Rubens is as a landscape painter. I mean, it's a flour mill, and the feeling to me is almost that of dough and flour rising up in the air. You can see the miller after a hard day's work with a big bag of flour descending from the mill, the cart waiting downstairs, the lights, the whole thing of it. I just feel that Rubens sort of inhabited this space. I mean, sometimes I am as partial to Romanticism as the late 19th century Rubens scholars were. I'm sorry for that. And then this is a lot less romantic. This is what remains of the mill today. So the Germans bombed it in 1914. The whole mill burned down and it's gone. But the four pillars still remain in the landscape. And in the early 20th century, this statue has been added to it. I really much prefer the Rubens version. And this is a view from the other end. This is the castle of Perk. You can see the village church over there. You can see the mill. The horizon has the churches of Appegem and Weerde. The building in the distance behind the mill is actually the tower and the castle of Het Steen. So by really adding these maps and all these iconographic sources together, we can really step into these paintings again. And the things you can see on Petrebus' surveyor's map can be linked to drawings like this. The mill is also there, the tower is there, the church of Perk, the country estate of David Teniers, Drei Towers, and so on. So it's really quite fun to sort of triangulate all these different sources together. So the maps, they are not important artistic products. They're not a Rubens landscape, obviously, but they do, you know, despite their very practical purpose, they do contain a certain poetry of themselves, especially in the names of the features. This is hard to translate, but some are like Ravenswood, or like Babelbrook, or like the Long Meadow, or the Tin Pot. And if you're Flemish, you can almost feel the landscape simply because of the names on the map. And one of the names is really important to us. It's called the Zilveren Bemd, the silver mead, actually. And it was called the silver mead by the villagers of Eloët since the 16th century, because often, especially after frost, silver coins would come out of the ground, Roman coins. And we have a letter from Rubens from 1638 in which he writes to his friend, the scholar Nicolas Claude Fabry de Perez. He writes about the discovery of 2 coins on his estate, and he is very, very excited about this on land he owned on the Zilveren Bemd. One of the coins has the inscription Spes, and the other Hope, and the other has the inscription Fortuna, so fortune. And Rubens obviously took this as an auspicious omen, and he was really mightily pleased about this. These are not the coins Rubens found, but these are the same Antonine coins, that type that he did discover there. So again, thanks to the names on the map, we can really link elements from Rubens' biography to areas in the landscape. I mean, a lot of this research was very, very boring. I have bored all my colleagues with this for a long time, because it's archival research. A lot of it is documents, not paintings. And it often made me think of a book by an American art historian, Svetlana Alpers, from 1983, The Art of Describing. And in that book, Svetlana Alpers argues that Flemish art, Netherlandish art in general, was simply about description, the description of reality, a sort of cartographic way of looking at the world. And her problem was that a lot of continental European scholars, in her opinion, sort of try to interpret that description in an emblematic manner. So she had the idea that we were all trying to find meaning where none was to be found. So while reading all the descriptions, looking at these maps, I had to think about her book a lot. Because this bill of sale I found from 1682, also an unknown document which really lists all Rubens' belongings, it's a description really of the land. Or the deed of sale in which Rubens acquires the estate, it's a very precise description. Every parcel of land, really boring, really repetitive, is listed one after the other. So what is the relation, I wonder, between description and the art of landscape painting? So what is the relation between this, which we all find rather boring, and then this, which we all find amazing, really? So in a way, Rubens is a surveyor. Rubens is, I have discovered, in a sense, a cartographer. This is really a quite precise painting of his land, the land he owned near Het Steen. So the horizon is conceived in such a manner as to include his furthest belongings. In Muizen to the northeast, and in Kapellen to the northwest. So he really thought, how am I going to maximize the view on my own land? You mustn't think of land ownership in Flanders as being contiguous. So this did not all belong to Rubens. We never had like a dissolution of the monasteries with Henry VIII handing large tracts of land to noble families. In Belgium, because of donations to the church particularly, land ownership was extremely fragmented. So religious orders in Mechelen or Brussels or Vilvoorde would own a bit here and then a bit there and another bit there. It was a sort of patchwork of ownership. So what Rubens does is that he combines the sort of descriptive nature with the idea of poetry. He lumps a village or three together into one town because it will look more picturesque, and he just combines fact with fiction in a way, in a very attractive manner. It has often been said that the huntsman in the foreground is Rubens himself, but actually it's more like a place name sign indicating the parish where he lived, which was fully written as St. Hubert's Eloate. So it's a sort of wink to the location. So Rubens would not have made for a good surveyor or for a good feudal clerk or a cartographer. His imagination is simply too rich. So because of this sort of flight over the Flemish landscape, we've been able to sort of locate on the map these three landscapes already. Let us now return to the sluice tower where we started our story over the Seine. It is from this place that Rubens conceived the so-called rainbow landscape. Up until now, this has been thought to be a sort of imaginary picture, a sort of abstract ode to the Flemish landscape. But because of all the new information and the maps and long walks, it's become clear that this is in fact a very precise topographical rendition of Rubens's country estate. The church spire on the left is that of the village of Weerde, quite close to the sluice tower. Rubens owned land, by the way, on the river here. Several tracts, we'll return to that in a bit. The tower, the spire just to the left of the rainbow is that of the village of Eloate, his parish church. The mill, you can see the blades of the mill sort of glistening in the sun in the back. That is the mill of Perk, which we saw in the Louvre painting. And that makes the building we see in the front actually Het Steen, Rubens' own estate, situated under a rainbow. So again, it's very much a combination of cartographic precision and poetry. The landscape in reality is quite flat, but Rubens sort of adds a bit of drama by making it more undulous than it is in reality. I mean, a mill was for obviously reasons clearly cited on a higher place than the rest, but Rubens really exaggerates these differences in his picture. This cow, we're almost done. I'm just showing you this cow because I'm sort of crazy in love with this cow. I think it's the best cow in the whole of art history. It's just so beautiful. It's lapping up its own reflection in the river against a backdrop of the reflection of the rainbow. It's technically just painted with such mastery. A lot of the ground of the picture is coming through as well. I could just look at this cow for hours and be perfectly content. I mean, to me, Rubens is the best. Zooming out again, I mean, for later viewers, the details of the topography in the back, it was not important to them anymore. But for Rubens and his family, it was obviously important because this was their neck of the woods. This is their estate. Later viewers who don't understand the topography do not understand the placing of this wood. What it does is basically it hides the city of Brussels and it hides the town of Vilvoorde. And Rubens' sort of dismay for Brussels and the court and all its intrigue and machinations was pretty well known at this period. So it is here, away from the court, in the country, that he really finds new inspiration in a way under the rainbow. So I know from documentary evidence that Rubens owned land here on this tract of the river, which we now know precisely where it is. I'm going to talk about one final element of this landscape, and it's this sort of golden ingot or a sort of wedge of a cereal crop which leads our eye sort of deeper into the composition. It's a really smart sort of thing to do. But it is an unusual form, and it's quite small for a wheat field, and it is especially very close to the river. You would not plant wheat that close to the river because wheat is very prone to rot. It's much better to reserve that for grazing land. So why is the wheat here? Also note the girl with the pail on her head, the pail and the wheat. So I will argue that this is basically an homage to Rubens's second wife, Helena Fourmont. She was blonde, but I mean, that's not the whole point, obviously. But the family Fourmont, the word Fourmont meant wheat in French in the 17th century. And the family used wheat in their heraldic devices from the 1620s on. This is, for example, from a tapestry series commissioned by them. This is another example from Hélène Fourmont's actual grave. You can see the sheaves of wheat as her heraldic device. And I found out through archival sources that she was really heavily involved in the management of the country estate. Often the men had to work in Brussels, in Antwerp, in Mechelen, travel a lot for work sometimes, and it was actually the women who ran these estates. Don't forget that the family owned other agricultural estates north of Antwerp, in Ekeren, in Zwijndrecht, in Doel. They had a lot of experience of getting money out of the land. And just one incident which really sort of contradicts the idea of Helena Vermont being this sort of silly blonde girl who had to sit for paintings, is that she had 500 elm trees chopped down on the estate to sell them for construction wood. It's very poignant because elm trees no longer exist in our landscape as well. Just a point to be made, the wheat is an ode to his wife, Helena Vermont. So to more or less summarize, what I want to say is that these landscapes are not just sort of topographical descriptions or renditions. They're also not just abstract odes to the Virgilian, Arcadian, Flemish landscapes. They are very much personal, biographical statements about the fecundity of his wife and of the Flemish landscape. I think it's important to know that in 1635, when Rubens buys the estate, Helena Vermont has already given him 3 children, Clara Johanna, Franz, and Isabella Helena. And in 1637, in the early summer of 1637, Peter Paul Jr. is born, conceived at Het Steen in the summer before that. So Het Steen and this place was a place for not just artistic creation, but also procreation for Rubens. In conclusion, returning to our judgment of Paris, I hope that when you walk through the Rubens galleries in the museum, that you will see that the landscape background and the figure of Helena Vermont, as described by the Cardinal Infant, are basically the same. They are both about the fertility, they are about beauty, about creation and procreation, about a place where, at Steen, where the artist's imagination sort of took root and came to beautiful fruition. So don't forget to look at the nudity, but look at the landscape as well in the future. Also, on a less lyrical note, I hope that the next time you land or take off in Brussels airport, which is not a very beautiful place to be, that you will realize that we are all just sort of passengers in a Rubens landscape. And I also hope that while you ignore the Iberia safety instructions, that you will smile and know and be in the sure knowledge that you are under Rubens's rainbow. Thank you very much.